Point. Joining us now is Trymaine Lee, MSNBC contributor and executive producer of the new documentary, Hope in High Water, A People's Recovery, 20 years after Hurricane Katrina.
Trymaine, congratulations on the documentary, man. Really appreciate your telling of this story 20 years later. You were on the ground then as a cub reporter, as they would say, covering the events of that day. Let's take a quick listen from the documentary about New Orleans 20 years later, Hope in High Water.
20 years later, what's been the progress made?
Some neighborhoods have been rebuilt, yet other neighborhoods have been totally abandoned. Some people have been able to return home and build, while many others are still in what we call the New Orleans diaspora. So we have to be real about why a second line feels so good on Sunday, because Monday morning you're dealing with some real soul-sucking stuff.
Every single day it still feels like the wound's not healed just yet.
No, no. It feels like we moved on, but you move on with a limp.
You move on with a limp. Trymaine?
That's right. First of all, it's good to be here with y'all today. I'd hoped to be in New Orleans, but I had to change of plans. And in all these years, even though I left New Orleans, I've carried a piece of New Orleans with me every step along the way. I'll never forget what I witnessed and experienced in those early days after Katrina. There was a lot of pain, a lot of heartache, and a lot of struggle. But there were also so many moments where folks stepped up for their own communities when everything else failed them. We're talking about this FEMA letter and people, the situation there. And I'll never forget, just days after the storm, President George W. Bush, "You're doing a heck of a job, Brownie." Meanwhile, people were starving. There were still people, bodies under blankets and lawn chairs. There were still people packed at the convention center. There were still huddled masses under the interstate, getting water dropped from helicopters and pushed out of the back of trucks. But even in the face of all that, and I noticed this from my earliest days being on the streets there is such a pride and a resolve and a persistence of the folks in New Orleans, some of the most honest people you'll ever find in your life. And so 20 years later, to revisit these communities and talk to folks who aren't waiting for politicians. They're not waiting for the promises. They're not waiting even for the resources. They're doing it themselves, like literally helping to feed children by teaching them how to grow food. They're literally using the arts to empower folks. They're fighting on the Gulf Coast of Mississippi for the very land beneath their feet, not just from the encroachment of big industry, but also natural disasters. And so it was an honor and a privilege. And in so many ways, I hope that I'm giving this city and their people their flowers because it's given me more than I could ever repay. It really helped launch my career. From there, I went to New York Times. I went on to, to where I am today. And I owe that in no small part to the folks of New Orleans allowing me to tell their stories.
I mean, to be very clear, Trymaine Lee won a Pulitzer, Mr. Chairman, for his coverage of Katrina, because you were working locally there at the time, as Michael noted. The images, we had some images up while you were speaking from the documentary, and to just see that footage from 20 years ago, literal people on top of buildings, looking for help, being airlifted out of their communities, you would think these were images from another country. And I am just always reminded that this happened in the United States of America, and in the aftermath of it, so many people got on national television and referred to citizens of this country as refugees.
That's right.
As though they are not a part of the fabric of who we are as a nation. Juxtapose that with what's happening right now to FEMA, Trymaine. I wonder, and I shudder to think, what happens because these natural disasters are becoming more and more prevalent, because climate change is real, and the floods, the hurricanes, these are things that are not letting up, they're only intensifying. And I shudder to think what happens the next time a community needs the assistance that we thought we learned a lesson from when they didn't get it 20 years ago.
Simone, I'll tell you what, and honestly, I understand how, refugee was used as a slur in some sort of way. But on the other hand, it seems a little appropriate because we've always, as Black people in this country, existed under this kind of conditional citizenship. Y'all were referring back to history a little while ago, lest we forget, after the great promise of Reconstruction, as Black people are nation building, once the federal government removed itself and its troops from the South, then the baseline reset. And so then we had to fight every turn for our wholeness as Americans. So in some ways, this was the perfect illustration of our continued fight to be included in an America that we made better and that we built. And to your point, I've been having conversations the last couple of weeks with folks about, lessons learned or the convenient forgetting of what we've gone through. And almost to a person, they said, could you imagine if Katrina happened now in a Donald Trump presidency, right? With the erosion of that bolstered FEMA, but also his stance on poor, Black, and marginalized people, right? Can you imagine that? If 20 years ago, we experienced a population of people who somehow were criminalized as if they played some role in the levees breaking, as if they played some role in the destruction of their communities, treated like prisoners, treated like animals, and to your point, treated like refugees from some war-torn country. And so I think when we think about the lessons, I don't think we learned many because we're pretty much back in the same position we've always been in, and now that much worse.
So, Trymaine, this documentary is powerful on so many different levels, and I want to get to the nub of something you just said a moment ago, and that is, why do they still have to wait? Why 20 years later are communities not rebuilt?
Well, the reality is, and I hate to beat this drum, but I've been beating this drum, and we've been beating this drum, is that there is still an expectation that Black people somehow deserve less. Right? There's always an undercurrent of anti-Blackness as if that is our rightful place to be waiting. And we continue to occupy this kind of perpetual underclass, despite how much we've climbed, despite how much we've educated ourselves. And in the case of a place like New Orleans, saved themselves when no one else is there to patch up the pieces. I think there is an expectation that the lower Ninth Ward, this poor Black community, is rightfully in their position. And I think there's no other reason why we wouldn't care for Black people in this country as if they aren't our fellow citizens and brothers. This is our family and our communities and our people.
We could have a whole hour-long conversation about this, but Trymaine, he made a documentary. Trymaine Lee, thank you. Folks, you can stream Hope in High Water on Peacock right now.